Hey everyone, my name is Tom Oliver Regenauer. Welcome to today's episode of MANOVA International. We're recording this in February of 2025. And a quick note up front, as you most likely will realize in a few minutes, I'm not a native speaker, so please bear with my German accent. As long as I don't sound like Klaus Schwab or the German foreign minister, I think we're good though. My guest will do most of the talking. Let's bring him on. Welcome, James Corbett.
Thank you very much for having me on, Tom Oliver. It is a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for taking time. I guess most of my readers will know you. However, in case someone doesn't, which I hope there's not a lot of people, would you mind briefly introducing yourself first?
Sure. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. And I guess if you want the very long story, we could go back to the 1970s, where I was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, but you probably don't want the whole story. Anyway, I landed here in Japan in 2004. As a lowly English teacher, and it was sometime around 2006 that I started stumbling down the internet rabbit hole, discovering information about how the world really works. And, well, maybe you and your audience know this, maybe they don't, but at any rate, it was a process that once it starts, it's hard to stop falling down that rabbit hole. And I found a way to dig myself out of that rabbit hole by starting the Corbett Report in 2007. So this is the 18th year that I've been doing this work now, and I've been doing it full-time since 2011. So it is my full-time job to be a podcaster, researcher, writer. What am I? I guess I'm a teacher, I suppose, is what I've landed on. I'm an educator of some sort, trying to, at the very least, just tell people and teach people about what I have learned over those 18 wild years of finding out about the world and how it works. And I guess the short version of what I do, for people who've never heard of me, I'm sure some people would say conspiracy theorist and dismiss me as that. But I think realistically what I do is essentially revolving around the concept and the question of how does power operate in society. And for some reason, when you talk about that in its historical context, people understand, oh yeah, there were oligarchs and there were conspiracies and there were all sorts of power moves that were being made by people behind the scenes and powers behind the throne and all that sort of thing. But for some reason, we are taught that in our day and age, none of those intrigues exist and you're a crazy conspiracy theorist if you believe in them. Well, I rejected that orthodoxy and thankfully was on the very, very beginning of a rising tide of information that was flooding online at that time in the early 2000s. And because I was, I guess, one of the boats that was first in the harbor, I have risen very high on that wave. And I try to use that position that I have now as a voice out there in the alternative media space to talk as accurately as I can about what I know, and hopefully not to talk too much about things that I don't know. But I'm a human, I'll make mistakes, but I do try my level best to report on what's really happening in the world.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Yeah, there are several reasons I'm happy to have you on, because your diligent and fact-based, detail-oriented work makes me discover new stuff every time I visit the site, and it makes your website a unique archive for basically every topic you can come across, being a conspiracy realist, as you like to call it. And even I started 25 or so years ago doing research on transgenerational organized crime with the stuff that was happening with the Red Army faction in Germany. But even I come across a lot of new information because you're really going into the details. And the second reason I like to have you on is you are solution focused, because we all know it's kind of a crazy time. We all understand that we are living in a disturbing, increasingly disturbing blend of 1984 and Brave New World, but there are not enough people looking and investigating and pointing to ways out of that, and you are one of those that actually does it. And last but not least, your work is referenced in my last two books and in my new book as well. I have to quickly hold that up, because the title has been, if not invented, at least been made popular by you. So maybe as a starting point, I don't think you are keen on doing another 40-second deep dive on Trump, Musk, and the question of everything, because I did that over the last few weeks and I saw your recent interviews. That's obviously a dominating topic, but I want to talk about the bigger picture a little bit. So maybe as a starting point, what's your understanding of hopium? And people might know your episode, June 2021, I think, a brief history of hopium. So what's your understanding of hopium, and why did you think it was important to release that specific episode at that moment in time?
Well, I think hopium is an evergreen topic. If I released it today, it would be as relevant as 2021. I could have released it in 2007. I could have released it at any time. I think it would be, unfortunately, just as relevant because I think the core concept pertains, it's certainly throughout the entirety of the modern democratic, liberal, enlightened era that we're living in. And specifically, for people who don't know, the concept of hopium is obviously is essentially an analogy to opium, which, as people know, an opiate creates pleasure in your brain by essentially simulating certain chemicals that will release happiness, feelings of pleasure in your brain. But of course, as we know, opium is addictive and ultimately destructive, as people need more and more and more of the opium to just maintain normalcy, let alone the highs that they experienced at first, until it completely subsumes their life and they will do anything to get their next hit of opiate. Well, in the same way, I think that the political structure that exists around us, that controls almost all of us in its grasp, has been created to keep us essentially constantly waiting for the next hit of hopium, which will be delivered in the form of a political messiah that sweeps onto the scene promising whatever it is that you want. And as I've been at pains to note, certainly over the past few years, I think the refinement of the technique of hopium has really, it's truly been scientifically crafted at this point over at least a century of people essentially selling political candidates like they would sell any other product on the market. And back in the day, maybe there had to be vast and specific promises. For example, Woodrow Wilson back in 1916, promising to keep America out of the war that he eventually, of course, plunged America directly into, etc., etc., that type of hopium. But by the time it arrived on the scene in 2008 in the form of Barack Hussein Obama, suddenly it had been perfected to the point where literally 2 words were enough to capture the American public. And those words were hope and change. Because at that point, after dealing with 8 years of the neocons, of course, Americans were ready for hope and change. So here's someone promising exactly that. Yay. And the Obama-Messiah was greeted onto the political scene. So that was the context in which I start the framing of that hopium episode, looking at the Obama-Messiah phenomenon, which people may or may not remember, but for those who lived through it, it truly was something to behold. And at that time, me being at least somewhat down the rabbit hole, I knew enough to know that this isn't what it seems, that he's not going to end the never-ending wars, he's not going to completely change course, etc., etc. And lo and behold, he did not live up to his most fervent acolytes' desires and dreams. And they eventually came down from their hopium fix, but 2016, a new hopium of a very different sort arrives on the scene to captivate another portion of the public, usually pretty much the other half of the public that weren't caught up in the Obama-Messiah complex. And here goes the pendulum swing. So I situate Trump and what has happened specifically with regards to the American political context in that overall story of hopium, but I think it is relatable to anyone and everyone everywhere in the world. There are versions and iterations of this that play out in polity after polity around the globe, and I would just like people to be conscious of the phenomenon of hopium, which I need to make the distinction because I know that this does come up. There can be the poo-pooing of absolutely any positive news of any sort as, oh, that's just hopium. And it becomes a sort of it becomes a black pill doomsayer sort of panacea, as in nothing is good, nothing will ever happen that's good, and we should just throw out all hope. But no. In the exact same way, opium is a simulacrum of the pleasures that can be derived from actually achieving real goals in the real world. So hopium is playing on the genuine, true, real hope that can come from people taking action in the real world to make the world better. So I'm glad that you put the emphasis on the solutions aspect of what I do. I've only been doing Solutions Watch, my weekly solutions-oriented series for the past few years, but I have, if you go back through my archives, I have been talking about solutions and had various solutions podcasts for many years, precisely because I think, no, we don't throw out the hope out with the hopium. No. We separate the hope from the hopium. The hopium is this political nonsense that they parade out in front of us. The hope is what we can do once we realize we are sovereign individual human beings, and that the entire complex of illusion and propaganda that has been foisted upon us to get essentially our identities invested in this phony political system that's leading us along by the nose to a place where we don't want to go is a false construct. And if we take our own power back into our own hands and create communities of interest based on what we want to accomplish in the real world, we really can change the world. That is hope versus the hopium that they feed to us on the political stage.
No, true that. There's a nice quote that I used for the opening of my book, Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm going to butcher that, translating it from German to English, but it says that hope is the most evil of all evils because it prolongs the suffering of people. So that's on like page 1. And then at the very end, I have a own quote that I wrote. If you identified hope as to what it is and what it means, you can start living your dreams. So, and that's, I think, an important distinction between hopium and actual hope, because that's the driver that you have. That's the driver that motivates me, hoping that people wake up. So, but I do think we are living in an empire of hopium, and there are 2 dimensions for me, like the organizational versus the, let's say, mental or psychological dimension of that phrase, empire of hopium. So there's the empire part. And since you had an interview with Daniele Ganser, who's living like around the corner here in Switzerland, a while ago, about his new book called Empire America, or The American Empire, and knowing Cecil Rhodes, Carol Quigley's work, Sutton, and so on, and the Round Table stuff, and how League of Nations became the United Nations, I think it's fair to say it's the Anglo-American Empire in the end, but most people perceive it as the American Empire, and then there's the BRICS bloc and everything. But being born in Germany, I'm particularly interested in 2 things. First, you are a Canadian born, and if Trump is now saying we're gonna annex, take over, invade, buy Canada or so, you could say that Cecil Rhodes finally gets his last will, because it's a realm of the Commonwealth. So maybe it's not America taking over Canada, but it's maybe the 13 colonies coming home. And second, if you look at the European Union and Germany specifically, it seems that this time, for the next big disruption, moving into technocracy, Germany is not supposed to kick off another world war. We don't know, but it seems that they at least built the role model for a union that we are now being told is great as far as North American Union. Then you have the African Union, the Asian Union. So they're building up these unions and blocks, currency blocks all over the place. So the 2 questions, how do you look at that empire piece from an organizational point of view, considering Quigley's work and stuff? And what do you think is specifically Germany's or Europe's role as it's portrayed now, with even the 60 Minutes story now going around, where you can't even post something on social media and you get raided by the nice police guys in the morning at 6 a.m.?
Yeah. Okay. Excellent questions. And they go to the heart of, I think, what is really happening right now, which is a changeover in the form that the world empire is assuming. That doesn't mean I think it's going to be a fundamental change over in the power blocks that are ruling from behind the scenes, but I think they may be shifting things around on the geopolitical chessboard. So what does that actually mean? Well, I think you correctly identify, yes, there has been an Anglo-American empire that has functioned in different ways from different power centers over the past at least century and a half. And as you say, documented by people like Quigley, going back to the wheelings and dealings of people like Cecil Rhodes, who had his own version of that. And yes, for what you say, I hope people don't gloss over what you say. It's all documented, and it's readily available. Go read William T. Stead and his compilation of the final wills and testaments of Cecil Rhodes. There were several versions of his will. And of course, everyone knows about the Rhodes Scholarship, but not so many people know about, his secret society to try to create an Anglo-American empire that would rule a world government between Washington and London. People don't know about that so much, but it was even talked about and reported on in the New York Times, etc. So for
my readers should, though.
Sorry?
My readers should know. So
I
guess we have an educated audience.
Well, in case I spread this information around to people who haven't, they can check out, for example, I did a World War I conspiracy documentary at corbettreport.com/WWI that does touch on this, go into some of the detail, and has links to Carol Quigley and others who have talked about it, the New York Times and others who were writing about it openly at that time in the early 20th century. But yes, that's an important piece of this puzzle. And from that, we get things like, for example, the English geopolitical strategist, whose name is suddenly going to escape my memory, which is ridiculous because I've referenced him many, many times, who came up with the idea of the heartland and Eurasia as the key square on the geopolitical chessboard. You know who I'm talking. Mackinder, thank you. Who wrote about the essentially the geopolitical chessboard as it existed in that early 20th century, and how the Eurasian heart of essentially what he called the world. God, I'm not going to remember all of this off the top of my head, but he had a name for essentially the Eurasian landmass, and the sort of the core of that. Just happened to be where Zbigniew Brzezinski was writing about in the 1990s is going to be an important part of the geopolitical chess machinations in the coming years. And then suddenly we get this strike out of the blue on 9/11 from some terrorist who's being hosted in Afghanistan, and which is going to necessitate a generations-long war of occupation in the heart of the Eurasian landmass there for the Anglo-American Empire. Surprise, surprise. So this has been an important part of this. And from that lens, we can see actually really the traditionally British strategy of controlling Europe has always been to pit the strongest continental power against basically everyone else in order to keep them divided. And that has taken different forms over different centuries, but in the early 20th century, a core part of that was suddenly this forming of this triple entente, which would have been unthinkable previously, but suddenly Britain and England and Russia are teaming up against Germany. What's going on here? And that eventuates into World War I in a very strange way. And then we get in World War II, of course, we get again, Germany and Russia being played off against each other as a key part of that divide and conquer. And isn't it interesting that here, as we go into 2025, it looks like the new American empire, or what's left of it, is basically saying goodbye to Ukraine, and you Europeans figure it out. Now, you Europeans are going to commit all your forces to standing there on the border between Ukraine and Russia, and you're going to get in the middle, and it's going to be a European war again. I don't know what that means, but historically speaking, it does look like something we've seen many times before. And in fact, I did write about this several years ago. I'm not going to remember the name of the editorial off the top of my head, but I did talk about how essentially there was a war for the heart of Europe that's going on between the Anglo-American Atlanticist empire versus the BRICS side of the equation. And whose side is Europe's bread buttered on, and which way are they going to, what calculation are they making here? Well, that is the type of calculation that certainly in the old order, the post-World War II order, was very simple. Yes, Pax Americana, it's an American world, the American unipolar polar power is the umbrella. That is obviously coming into question now, and the changeover in geopolitical reality will undoubtedly bring some incredible geopolitical fireworks, and I don't mean incredible necessarily in a good sense, as we could very well be seeing the return of hot war to Europe and elsewhere around the globe. So I'm not looking forward to any of that, but it is the times that we're living in, and I do think it is important that we understand this history of who has been manipulating and coercing geopolitical events for at least the past century and a half, so that we have some understanding of where things are heading from here.
Yeah, true. And as it seems, then Germany is again taking a lead role in getting that disruption done. It might be hot war. It might just be the European Union being a role model for the other blocs that they are building. And it's funny that the likes of Alex Jones have been opposed to anything like a North American Union in the past, but now it's kind of a thing, and it looks astonishingly similar to the TechNate that they had planned in the 30s. No? So and I did write a lot about technocracy. You did as well, and in the light of your World War I conspiracy documentary, plus the technocracy background that was taken over by, or that was at least a favorite idea of Rockefeller and the likes of that oligarchy elite. It's astonishing as to where that. Or I'm wondering as to where that's going, because there's a likelihood of war, of hot war, but it seems, for me at least at the very moment, that's maybe more focused to happen in the context of Israel, Gaza, and Iran, that they are still not having under control. Where they need to drop some more democracy, it seems, and then you have that other area in Europe. But the way that global governance has to function is that it needs to be organized. So something like the UN is always overlooked. People always talk about the pandemic treaty and that they want to leave the WHO. But nobody really talks about the UN, because it's this amazing, colorful, inclusive organization that does all these fantastic things, just like UNESCO, where people forgot the founding documents. So... and I just came across that. I'm not sure if you saw that. There is a website called globalgovernanceforum.org, where they talk about a revision of the UN Charter, a second UN Charter that is supposed to be ready by 2030. That's where the official ratification process has to begin as per that timeline. And that interestingly includes a global army, a global tax model, all that stuff that the European Union already has as an umbrella above all these countries. So for listeners and viewers, you might want to check out that globalgovernanceforum.org website. It's a UN affiliated one. And
I have not seen that. I know of various organizations that have existed, continue to exist, that have forwarded various world charters, earth charters, those types of things, world government ideas, but I haven't seen that one in particular, but it doesn't surprise me in the least. However, I would say that I think the true global government unmasking itself and being revealed is probably not in the near term. The near term is the regional government solution to the problems that plague us. And as you say, suddenly the North American Union is being normalized and even actively cheered on by elements of the supposed resistance that were supposedly dead set against globalism a decade or two ago are now actively cheering it on. It is a thing to behold. But clearly, EU, the European Union, clearly is the model. And a model in every sense. I mean, for example, the EU, the Eurasian Economic Union, was put together by Putin and various Eastern European former Soviet blockers, deliberately and consciously modeled the EU on the EU. So we have seen this being the sort of the exemplar of regional government. And I do find it particularly interesting. Again, I was writing about this several years ago, that I can't remember who at the time floated the idea of the EU army. We need an EU army in order to be able to respond to things that NATO doesn't want to take over or whatever. It was largely poo-pooed at the time, but suddenly now, hey, it is the rage. And what is it we just heard the other day, $800 billion or something like that, in terms of EU new commitments of funding to fund the defense industry, because they're suddenly very, very interested in getting their chops into Ukraine and anywhere else. We're seeing the formation of some sort of real deal EU army in real time here. And again, it is being actively cheer-led by the populist movement that's totally crushing people, crushing the government by getting people to trust in government and want more expanded regional government again. It's very, very confusing. But no, clearly, I think the real underlying agenda here is technocracy, and that might be difficult to see at various stages. But I think the easiest way to understand that is to see the picture of Elon Musk appearing at the World Government Summit via Zoom link, of course, talking about how he's tech support for the White House now. And people, again, the very people who were supposedly resisting this agenda are now the ones absolutely cheering it on. Yay, Doge is going in there and fixing things. And how are they doing that? Well, slashing a lot of jobs and things. Yay, great. Getting rid of the waste and spending by putting algorithms in charge of monitoring and checking. Oh, the algorithm has told us that these jobs can all be cut. And for example, we can cut all probationary officers in these various departments. Oops. Well, those probationary officers in the Department of Energy who happen to be on the Special Nuclear Task Force aren't really probationary employees. They're people who have moved positions within the past year. And we accidentally cut a couple hundred people from maintaining the nuclear stockpile that we didn't mean to do. We immediately rescind their layoff. Oops. These are the kinds of things that happen. Anyway, that's just one of the things that can go wrong when they start implementing the technocracy. But the thing that is more existentially dreadful to me is not that this technocratic ideal will make certain mistakes like that along the way that can then be corrected by the humans who come along after it. It is that it might actually work. And yay, they may actually start to cut some of the waste and fraud and spending and all of this, and people will cheer it on and go, good. You see, it shows we do need the ever-loving, graceful machines and their technocratic engineers in charge of things because they, gosh darn it, can do a better job than these pesky humans. We are seeing the normalization of technocracy right before our very eyes. And again, it is the people who were erstwhile resistance leaders who are now fully on board and cheering on their own technocratic enslavement.
True. A lot of my readers are astonished as well as to where did all these people go that the last 5 years have been criticizing the government. Now they're cheering on the next one. And I agree as far as the regional blocks are maybe the focus area before it gets to any form of like global government instead of global government. Governance.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Can I just ask a question? Just a point of order.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there that same wordplay going on in German? Is there global government versus global governance?
Nah, there's a lot of stuff that works fantastically in English, like election and selection, that you can't do in Germany. It's just too complicated. In Germany, it would be called Weltregierung, and the other one would be Regierung. So that's this world government and government.
Doesn't flow off the tongue, no.
Not really. So, but anyway, it leads me to the second part of that empire of opium sentence, and that's the mental psychological dimension. You did a nice fantastic documentary called The Media Metrics in, I think, summer of 22, July 22 or something, and I think that group of people that we just mentioned that are now cheering on the new government, the new king, being on opium, they're mainly suffering media, I would say, and not only the mainstream channels, but the mainstream alternative media as well. So what's your take on overcoming this bubble that has been created to basically move people away from the lamestream media into something that they think is kind of the revolutionary new form of media that is pursuing truth and facts, and in the end does the same thing, because it's not about the stuff that they are talking about, like maybe they even get rid of the Federal Reserve for some blockchain type of thing, but it's the stuff that they are not talking about that concerns me. So what's your take on a solution-focused, take on how to overcome that? Because as you pointed out I think just yesterday I saw an interview where you said, if you want to have mass adoption, you actually need YouTube because the other stuff doesn't work properly, doesn't reach that many people. So how do you envision that going forward?
Well, let's start this exploration with an observation. When Elon Musk went about basically laundering his money into reputation and ultimately political capital, what did he do? He acquired Twitter. He's paid, what was it, $47 billion or whatever it was to get Twitter. Why? Because media is the point at which you control nations. Internationally at this point. It used to just be you could control the nation by controlling the media. Now you can control the globe to some extent. And I think that was absolutely an important part of the creation of the Muskian empire. And it shows that the new public square is Twitter and TikTok, Instagram, whatever the kids are doing these days. And I think that really does speak to the moment in time that we are at, which is a moment in time that is both incredibly hopeful and incredibly hopiumful. And the hope side of it is what I personally have experienced in my life. The fact that I am sitting here today talking to you about these things, and that this is my job that I do for a living and I'm supported by people around the world, is only enabled by the fact that we have this remarkable technology for communication, that we can, for the first time, a guy, just a random regular English teacher in Japan, can start putting out a podcast and ultimately acquire, over time, millions of people around the world will listen to him. That's crazy, and that would not have happened in any other era of human history ever. I would never have had a voice in any other era except this one, because of this remarkable revolution we're going through. So I am particularly keen and attuned to the fact that we have lived through a revolution because I've experienced it. Having said that, what is the hopium side of this is that, yes, people start to... it's the old adage, the old English adage. I don't know if there's a German equivalent, but first they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Something along those lines, right? Exactly in that context, 2 decades ago when I started, the idea of where did you hear that on the internet was a common joke, because that's ridiculous. Random people have blogs and things. So you're not going to listen to them. You're going to listen to the fact guardians at the mainstream media institutions, the establishment mouthpiece Mockingbird media. And over the course of the past 2 decades, how that has changed to the point where, yes, after cable cutting and ultimately people starting to realize how much they're being lied to, they have flocked away from the establishment media towards the internet. And now the idea of actually getting your news simply from TV or something like that would be ridiculous. No one under 40, 50 years old would do that, right? Now, unfortunately, what that means is 20 years ago, the establishment was fine by just simply laughing at people like me and the internet revolution. But now that they're taking it seriously, well, not only have we seen the ridiculous, failed, aborted, silly attempts of establishment media to try to craft some sort of online presence that has not really gone so well over the past couple of decades, even with the thumb on the scale of things like YouTube, where they algorithmically up-rank the trusted news sources and de-rank people like me and others. Well, obviously I've been deleted, but you know what I mean. Not only has that been going on, but still people generally understand that CNN and mainstream media establishment pieces are lying to them. So I think it's quite demonstrable at this point. One does not have to have a lot of imagination to realize that when the oligarchs who steward over this international multi-trillion-dollar system of control and propaganda, etc., realize that, well, the kids these days are online, they're going to put their deep state propaganda operations into work online as well. And so now, of course, we're seeing all of these people who just a few years ago were totally, completely mainstream. In fact, people like Tucker Carlson in the American context, literally the most mainstream of mainstream people on the most mainstream network, seen by millions of people on a nightly basis. Now, suddenly he's this independent internet guy who will talk about aliens and JFK and whatever. He's talking about all the stuff because he's so off the rails. And, oh, by the way, Trump and Musk for the win. Yay, technocracy. So I think there is obviously a danger in this, as is being called these days, the mainstream alternative media, the laundering of certain previously establishment people's reputation so that they can now function in the independent media space. And people who just fell off the turnip truck yesterday and just started realizing they're being lied to are now casting about and looking for, well, who do I trust? Oh, well, okay, that guy. And he's independent. He used to be on TV. Now he's on the internet. Okay, good. I found something that I can rely on. Now, to a certain extent, I sympathize with people for that, because I certainly went through that process when I started falling down the rabbit hole and realizing, wow, I think I've been lied to about a lot. Who do I trust? What do I do? Like, what is the source of information I should rely on? It was a deeply disorienting process to fall down that rabbit hole. But that was back in the early 2000s when things were significantly less higher stake and higher paced than they are now. And people who have just in the past couple of years started casting about, I truly do pity them, because it is a much, much more chaotic and much more infested online environment than it was back in the day. So they have my sympathy, but unfortunately, sink or swim, and a lot of people are going to sink as they fall back into the habits that have been inculcated in them over the long term, which is, generally speaking, that this is all a spectator show. It is a show that they are watching, and you tune in to certain shows to get information. And this guy's going to tell me the truth. I can trust this guy. Whereas the true, actual, not hopium, but the hope-filled alternative is the breaking of that paradigm altogether. And as I always stress, don't trust James Corbett. Please don't believe James Corbett. James Corbett will post all his sources from that he's constructed his argument from and invites you to go and look at them and come to your own conclusions. And you have to strap on the thinking cap and you have to start thinking for yourself, because no one is going to come down from the sky and hand you all the information that you personally, Tom Oliver, you need this information in your life and this is how you should live. No one can do that, even if they were trying to do that for you. You have to take some of your intellectual, cognitive sovereignty back into your own hands and start making decisions for yourself, parsing information for yourself. That's a lot of work, I realize. And that's precisely why this is not a popular message. People want the easy solution. So the people who come along and say, don't worry, just trust me, this is the truth, and I can tell you exactly what you need to know, are going to be more popular. Having said that, it is an arms race. It is a propaganda arms race, and which side will win out on that? I still have hope in humanity, because I truly believe that people... Here's the thing. Here's one way of looking at it. They can sell you a lie by pumping it out through every single arm of their propaganda octopus that's encircling the globe and telling you 18 ways from Sunday that the sky is red, the sky is orange, the sky is green, the sky is purple, the sky is not blue. You're stupid for thinking that. You're crazy for thinking that. Oh my God, they should lock you in a cage. And that can work for a period of time, and people might start to think to themselves, well, maybe it is green. I don't know. It's kind of greenish. And that can have an effect. But ultimately, they have to continue to press and to spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars to get their propaganda networks to force this upon the people over and over and to drill it into them. And all it takes is for that little child to recognize the emperor is wearing no clothes. Wait, it's blue. And boom, the lie is over. It is broken. The spell can be broken. And that is the moment that we are starting to understand. People are starting to wake up, and they are doing more and more crazy propaganda narrative moves to try to keep people back in the system. But I think it's the beach ball they're trying to push under the water. It's gonna pop back up. Yep. And when it does, man, that's going to be something to behold.
The crazier it gets, the better our chances for providing some fact-based reporting. And as Last American Vagabond used to say, don't question everything and come to your own conclusions. So, but there's one nice quote, I think, that leads to an even deeper view on things. That's Jack Dorsey, Twitter founder, who said wrote a while ago, it's not about freedom of speech, but it's about free will. Yeah. So we are not fighting for freedom of speech, because you can basically say everything. You might get raided, depends on what you do and where you are doing that. Yeah. But it's about free will, and I think there's an important aspect of social economics and Richard Thaler's nudging stuff that we saw as a dry run or so, test a pilot during the COVID phase. Yeah. And you have, if you walk around in your city, there are these, they call it zombies over here in Germany, smartphone zombies, a combination of those two words. And it was the youth word of, I think, 2017, which is kind of telling. A lot of people have a hard time believing that, those 10, 20, 30, 40% of the population that are questioning everything can turn things around because of the amount of people you see walking around like zombies, being hooked to their devices and having those dopamine addictions that Sean Parker talked about famously.
And we're specifically engineered into this technology to get people addicted. This is not some conspiracy theory. Again, it's openly admitted. They concertedly put their engineering time into making these devices as addictive as possible. And lo and behold, many of the Silicon Valley moguls will not let their children use these devices. I wonder why. No, you hit on, I think, this is the profoundly important question. In fact, even more profoundly important than the question of the content that is being conveyed through this media. That is important, but more important still is the media itself. As my fellow countryman Marshall McLuhan would observe, the medium is the message. So what is the message of this electronic media? And unfortunately, you're exactly right. What Dorsey says there, I hope people don't poo-poo or dismiss that. That is incredibly important, existentially important. This isn't about freedom of speech. This is about free will. What does that mean? To get something of a handle on that, there was a internal Google video that was released several years ago called The Selfish Ledger. Look that up, The Selfish Ledger. For people who haven't watched it yet, just watch it and realize how creepy it is that Google, for example, truly does understand that the information that you are taking in and the way that information is being fed to you can start to essentially program you into a certain life path. And I've approached this. Sorry?
Just for reference, if for German readers, that was actually linked in my December 2024 article. So about Google programming people. Sorry for interruption.
Absolutely. And it's not something to be taken lightly. I think it is already going on. And I've talked about this. I've addressed this in various ways. For example, I had an episode up several years ago called Pricking the Filter Bubble, where I made the point that the fact that I am here at all doing what I do is to some extent a reflection of my programming through the algorithms that existed at that time back in 2006 on YouTube and Google Video and others that kept suggesting and recommending and showing me various 9/11 and other crazy conspiracy videos. Something of that pricked through my filter bubble and got into my consciousness and got me down this rabbit hole. And now, of course, that power can be used to shape people in various directions. And we have seen various iterations of this. But yes, the real true question is, once you start to live more of your life in mediated reality than in actual reality, the question is, who are you? Is the person that you really are, your true identity, is it you? Is that something that you came to spontaneously? Or is it something that has been fed into you? Is it something that is now being actively cultivated by some outside force, feeding you information in specific targeted ways? As, again, several years ago, Facebook admitted they were tampering with people's news feeds to see how they could influence their moods. And that was several years ago. You don't think that's still going on right now? And you think the For You and whatever algorithmic feeds they have going on Twitter and elsewhere is not a concerted attempt to try to cultivate and shape your perceptions? Of course it is. Why do you think Elon Musk would spend $47 billion on something like Twitter? Precisely to get into your head and to start manipulating it. So unfortunately, the deeper question is, I think what you're really driving at is, can we overcome the question of mediated reality at all? Or are we going to continue falling deeper and deeper and deeper into this conjunction with our devices that truly is transforming us? I mean, the term smartphone zombie might be some kind of funny term, but it speaks to a deeper truth. We are becoming some form of cyborg. And the only question is, when does that actually breach the skin barrier and get implanted into our brain? But it's no less a real thing just because that device is physically not actually in your body. It's usually on your body or within a few feet of your body anyway at this point. Wouldn't it just be so much easier if you could just implant it into your skull? And hey, Elon Musk is the cool guy who's going to do that. So really the question is, can we find a happy medium with the media that we consume, or will it continue to consume us until we are part of the Borg hive mind? And, that is the question. And again, sure. I don't have a wonderful pat solution to this. Yes, you should start leaving your phone at home when you can and start connecting with people more in the real world. But it's like talking to a brick wall at this point. I mean, yes, you could say that, but we know that people are going to continue scrolling their doom scrolling feeds. And what are they going to replace it with? Going back to talking to your neighbor outside on, talking to people on a sunny day? No, of course not. So until we have some sort of better solution to that, what is the solution? And I'm all ears, by the way. If you have any ideas on that, I want to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, that's why my previous book was called Truman-Show, and it has that one sentence. You can decide if you want to live in a lie or the lie. So it's a very big difference. And I think one of the solutions is, you are providing some solutions, I think, in form of digital journalism. So until now, you mainly published digital stuff. We can talk about that in a second. And you, correct me if I'm wrong, you are hosting your own website. You're doing basically everything alone. You're owning your data. You're owning your videos. If the Corbett report URL gets canceled, you can still access your server via the IP address or something. So that's, I think, spearheading autonomy in a very specific form on the digital side. What we are doing for MANOVA and what we're trying to deal with is going to analog. So bringing back print magazines. I'm publishing my online articles that are available for free, like yours. All the work is there for free, but I'm publishing it once a year as a book. So if I sell a few thousand copies, that finances my website a little bit and all the work around the book. But it mainly conserves the work outside of the digital space. So going analog is very important. However, maybe I think you are one of the few guys also that's not on social media. You are not on YouTube. You've been banned with 6 million or so followers. What was it?
I had about 600,000 subscribers. I had
600,000.
However many tens of millions of views. Yeah.
Yeah, millions of views. So, but from your perspective and also being a father, having a family, how are you dealing with that in from your personal point of view? So, how are you keeping up with mental, resilience and because a lot of people ask me, it's all black pill journalism, it's always bad, but information is information. It depends what you do with it and how you react to it.
That's true. And you know what? Maybe I often get this question, and it's kind of hard for me to answer it. I often just say, well, it's just constitutionally how I am. I am the type of person that
same here.
I'm not going to just sit there in a corner and cry. I'm going to do something if I see a problem. But having said that, perhaps there is, to some extent, I do have I have a conscious awareness of the difference between mediated reality and actual real world reality. And what I am ultimately fighting for is my real world reality with my family. I want the world where I can play with my kids and have fun. And in order to do that, I have to confront this craziness that's taking place all around us and that's shaping people's perceptions and turning the world into what it is. But in that sense, maybe it's like strapping on the helmet to go to war. And if you can take the helmet off at the end of the day and enjoy your family, isn't that ultimately what this is about? And I am grounded in what I am doing, why I am doing this. I'm not doing it because I'm afraid or I have hatred in my heart or I'm trying to fight some sort of war or something. I'm doing it out of love because I love the world that I'm in. I love the people in my family and those around me. And I want to preserve that. And I want to preserve that space where we can just be ourselves. That sounds like a world I want. So it is a fight, but I am able to take the helmet off, so to speak, and enjoy the world around me. And I have a lot of sympathy for people who are not in that position, people who don't have a family around them or people who don't have that thing that they're fighting for. If you have nothing that you're fighting for, then all you're doing is fighting against. And I don't think that's a winning proposition.
True that. I don't have kids, and maybe some of the things I regret getting older, because you should have raised a few rebellious small kids that can stand the machine at some point. However, I'm doing the same. It's about love for nature and for life itself, for music, for arts, for creativity. I recently heard Whitney Webb saying that when she was asked what is the solution to overcome technocracy, she answered that it's basically creativity. Do something, create something, whatever, building a shelf, I don't know, painting a picture, making music.
That's a beautiful answer, precisely because what is the technocracy doing? It is replacing humanity, right? In the arts, in everything. But yes, the creative side of who we are. This is the thing. I'm sure. Already you can just go to an AI website and type in, I want to hear a song in this style with this side and the lyrics should be about this. And suddenly you have a complete song. Yay. I wrote that song. No, you didn't. No, you are not a songwriter just because you can program an AI. No, if you want to make a song, you're going to have to go out and learn instruments and learn music theory and then experiment and try things, and it'll be crappy at first and it'll take a long time and you'll have to eventually get better, just like every generation in human history has ever done. And yet, I guess this is the dark side of the Jetsons, because when we were growing up, we thought that it was all going to be this crazy, amazing world where you push a button and suddenly, you know, whatever you want, and the briefcase turns into a car and whatever, you know, it's a wonderful, you have anything you want at your fingertips. But the dark side of that is, well, then what are we? What is humanity? What is even the point of living in a world like that? It's just anything you want at the push of a button. Who cares? What's the point of anything at that point? No, we need to develop as human beings, and we need to support those who are developing their human talents in human ways. And I think this is a good chance for example, live music and things like that to become more a part of people's life. Because right now, watching something on a screen, it's just like everything else on a screen. It's all the same. This is the flattening of content that people talk about, that incredible works of literature are exactly the same as trash that was tossed off in 2 seconds. Incredible orchestras performing amazing things are exactly the same as some AI-generated schlock. It's all just content that's happening on a screen. But we're losing the human nature of congregating in places together to appreciate something. And so I think that this is a chance to reclaim that and to think about, at any rate, to stake our claim in the ground that, yes, in order to combat the technocracy, we can't do that through technology, obviously. We have to reconnect with what it is that makes us human.
Yeah, and it's a very different thing. I went when I went on tour last year and had 20 or something evenings where I read from my books or had lectures and stuff. It was always packed. People just showed up because it's getting you there's goosebumps when there's somebody on stage saying something that moves you. It's very different experience listening to live music on a stage, seeing someone play the guitar instead of just listening to music. And AI or stuff will never have any form of soul like a good old Marvin Gaye record. It's just not having that soul. That's why it's called soul music. However, quickly coming back to media, because I think analog media is a solution, and also since we are facing a global media conglomerate, I think it's really great that and a lot of people of that alternative media bubble are now cheering on the technocracy. I think it's important that there's more international connection. So you have a lot of guests on your show from different countries. You are also trying to make global connections, because there's often I hear people talking, there's a referendum in Switzerland, but about the constitutional rights for analog life, but I don't know any details. So I'm coming back once I know. So it's great to have a little bit of a global connection and develop synergetic effects and have an exchange on what's going on here and there, because I guess that's the advantage of technology. It brings us together in terms of understanding and information, but it doesn't replace meeting people in person and fighting for your own life. So maybe last question. I know you have a hard stop there. The technology aspect of things. So there is like Odyssey, Bastion, Nostra, where we're building a portal as well with a side project. Do you think, as far as censorship resistance, that's something that's sustainable going forward? Or do you think, I mean, the internet is it's a few key spots that you can pretty much still switch off. So that's why I'm not fully trusting any digital currency and stuff. But what's your take on that one?
Right. No, well, I guess maybe it comes down to people's fundamental perspective and orientation within the framework of solutions and what they are thinking of and looking for in terms of solutions. If they are looking for something that lasts forever and always in all possible contexts from now until the end of eternity, yeah, probably not, right? But does it work today? Is it good enough for now? Are there people there that we can start to form something? That, I think, needs to be more of a realistic framework that we use to approach solutions. And that is why Solutions Watch that I do on a weekly basis is oriented towards, hey, all of these are provisional ideas and they all need to be whatever, reformed or rethought within whatever context you are in. But these are ideas that have worked here for these people in this way, and it works for this time, but it probably won't work later. I just got an email from someone the other day. Well, you recommended pre-search, but I've gone on there lately and it's garbage like all the other search engines. So you need to correct this right now. And I wonder, do I have to put in the caveat every single time I talk about any website or anything that's working at this particular moment? You know, when you find this video 5 years from now, it may not be working in the same way. I would like to think people understand that, but unfortunately, again, flattening of content, something that was produced today is exactly the same as something that was produced 11 years ago, and who cares what happened in between. But yes, we need to, I think of things as not the solution, the capital T, capital S, the solution that's going to be there forever and always. It's just something that works for now, and it works well enough that we can use it for our purposes today. And hopefully we can get people involved and grow it and ultimately develop into something bigger and better. And it'll take many turns along the way, I'm sure. And there will be outside forces trying to knock it down. That's another way that people try to poo-poo solutions and ideas. Well, yeah, if you build that, well, they're just going to come and attack it. Well, okay, so what is the solution then? Just don't do anything and just go along and do whatever they say. And then you'll never have any opposition from the government or whatever. I mean, obviously, of course, there is going to be conflict. It's going to be messy. It's not always going to work. Sometimes we'll go forward 2 spaces and we'll get pushed back 3 spaces. Who knows? But at any rate, it's part of the evolving process. So great, Odyssey and Noster and Bastion and Quartal and all of these ideas are out there and great, and I'm glad people are pursuing them, and I would never discourage anyone from pursuing anything that works for them, at least at this particular moment. And hopefully they're making plans for longer term, but always just forging ahead with what they have at the moment.
Temporary solutions, I guess. Right. Okay. Last question, and we're about to wrap up. And as people most likely will see that video a little bit later than your announcement, because we are having subtitles and using alternative platforms. There's no automatic subtitles, so I'll have to do a nice proper translation and add subtitles.
I'm sorry. Manually. I feel bad for you now.
No, it's fine. I mean, I appreciate doing it if there's a valuable conversation, but analog media. So you have something finally ready after I heard it started 1.5 decades ago or so.
Yes.
That you might want to talk about.
Literally 1.5 decades ago. Yes. Yes, it's a book. It's called Reportage, Essays on the New World Order. And yes, I literally started this in 2009. And here we are, 2025, and it's finally available. It's at reportagebook.com. And it is a collection of 20 essays on geopolitics, history, economics, philosophy. There's a couple of humorous things thrown in there. There's think pieces, etc. And none of them actually directly address the question of what is the New World Order. Instead, all of these essays together start to form a picture of the New World Order, because it's a very multifaceted thing that involves a lot of different ideas and philosophies and history. So I think I hope it's a happy medium, because obviously in this day and age, fewer and fewer people do read actual physical books. But even for people who do prefer reading physical books, great, here is one, and it's got 1,700 foot endnotes and links and what have you to various information, as with all my work. But it's also broken up into nice manageable essays. So if you're not much of a reader, you can just take one of the essays and take your time with it. And there's no particular order to them, so you can take them in whatever way you want, etc. So I think it's a relatively digestible form, but it is an actual physical book that is not censorable digitally, and that is available absolutely anywhere books are sold. It's a real deal book with a real ISBN number and all that. So you can go and order it from your local bookstore, which is probably the preferred way to get it, but you can get it on all the online shop places as well.
Love it. I love physical media.
Me too.
Final question. I know you have to run. How did you go about selecting those specific essays out of your thousands and of hours and editorials, and why exactly those essays?
Well, I should clarify, some of them are reworked pieces from that I have had in the past, but most of them are original. I haven't written, certainly none of them have been published in this form before, at any rate. And most, what was the editorial process? Let me cogitate on that for a second. I'm not, there was no strategy as in, I need an essay on this, I need an essay on that. Other than certainly the first and last essay, I think, make nice bookends and are sort of the personal side of this that hopefully introduce the reader to the subject in a way through my personal experience that will give it hopefully more meaning to them. But other than that, I wanted to cover on all the important things that I cover: history, geopolitics, philosophy, politics, etc. And there were at least 2, maybe 3 essays that were genuinely, I originally started the first rough draft of them in 2009 because I thought, oh, that's a good idea, I should write about this. And they have literally persisted now for 15 years. And obviously in that time, writing, rewriting, revising, rewriting, rewriting, revising the rewrites, etc., etc. It's obviously in a very different form now than it was that time. But some of these ideas have literally been there since 2009, which speaks to another aspect of this. I like to think that along with a lot of my best work, I think it is evergreen. I think a lot of the things that I talked about in 2010 are as relevant or even more relevant in 2025. The specific circumstances may change, but I think the underlying idea is there. And I think that's the same with these essays. So I don't think there is anything that is super timely, that time sensitive, that will not make sense in a future era. I'd like to think that these essays will stand the test of time.
Awesome. Thanks for the background. So, guys, and everybody listening, go get the book, get physical media, and if you haven't done it already, follow the Corbett Report at Corbett Report, CORBETtreport.com, and check on the amazing amount of work that's there for over 1.5 decades, a huge catalog of work and great documentaries. Get the newsletter and support independent media done by people who are actually questioning everything. Thanks, James, for joining and taking the time.
Thank you, and good luck with the translation.
Thanks.